Can you hear me? Okay. Hello and welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Olivia Marquis, and I'm a part of the event staff here at Politics and Prose, where we now host in-person and virtual events, along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. For a full list of everything confirmed, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. While we've lifted the mask mandate here in the store, you are encouraged to wear a mask throughout the event, and we can provide one for you if you did not bring one. When we get to the time for opening the floor to your questions, we've placed a standing microphone at the end of the aisle to your right. Please line up at this mic so that everyone can hear your question, as we want that question to be heard in our recording of the event. We are both audio and video recording, as well as live streaming today's program, so that you or anyone you know can soon find it at the Politics and Prose YouTube channel. Following the Q&A, we will have a signing here up at this table, so if you've not already purchased the book, we have many copies behind our registers at the front of the store, many of which have also already been signed by the author in case you do not want to wait in the signing line. For those of you who do want to wait in the signing line after the event, we will ask you to line up starting there at the pillar, and we will come by and ask your name for personalization, so please have your books ready for us. Once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs and lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. So without further ado, tonight I'm very excited to welcome Lara Love Hardin, celebrating the release of The Many Lives of Mama Love, a memoir of lying, stealing, writing, and healing. No one expects police to knock on the $1 million two-story home of a perfect cul-de-sac wife. But soccer mom Lara Love Hardin has been hiding a shady secret. She is funding her heroin addiction by stealing her neighbor's credit cards. Lara is convicted of 32 felonies and becomes inmate S32179. She learns that jail is a class system with a power structure that is somewhere between an adolescent sleepover party and Lord of the Flies. Furniture is made from tampon boxes and Snickers bars are currency. But Lara quickly finds the rules and brings love and healing to her fellow inmates as she climbs the social ladder to become the shot caller, showing that jailhouse politics aren't that different from PTA meetings that she's been used to attending. When she's released, she reinvents herself as a ghostwriter. Now she's legally co-opting other people's identities and getting to meet Oprah, meditate with the Dalai Lama, and have dinner with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. But the shadow of her past follows her. Shame is a poison worse than heroin. There's no way to detox. Lara must learn how to forgive herself and others, navigate life as a felon on probation, prove to herself that she is more good than bad, and much more. The Many Lives of Mama Love is a heartbreaking and tender journey from shame to redemption, despite a system that makes it almost impossible for us to move beyond the worst thing we've ever done. Lara Love Hardin is a literary agent, author, and president of True Literary. Prior to founding True Literary, she was a co-CEO of Idea Architects. She has an MFA in creative writing and is a 4-time New York Times best-selling collaborative writer, including a #1 New York Times best-selling Designing Your Life and a 2018 Oprah Book Club pick, The Sun Does Shine, which she co-authored with Anthony Ray Hinton. In 2019, she won a Christopher Award for her work affirming the highest values of the human spirit. In 2019, she was also nominated for an NAACP Image Award and shortlisted for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Love Hardin lives in La Selva Beach, California, with her husband, Sam. She has 4 children, 2 stepchildren, 5 dogs, 3 cats, 21 chickens, and 4 ducks. Hardin will be in conversation with Abby Maslin, the Washington Post bestselling author of the memoir Love You Hard. A distinguished educator and national speaker on caregiving and wellness, Abby is currently at work on her debut novel. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and 2 children. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose, Lara Love Hardin and Abby Maslin.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
They have Abby's book here, so I just want to say I just bought one, get one.
Thank you for that plug. And I wanted to add to my bio, we have just 1 dog because we live in D.C., but Lara wins the pet award. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you because, and you've probably discovered this over the past 10 days of having a book in the world, you read a memoir and you feel like you are that person's best friend at the end of reading. And there's like some truth to that, I think, as much as I know on the other end it can feel a little strange too. But there's so much I'm excited to talk with you about tonight, feeling like I've known you a lot longer than, the 20 minutes that we've actually been together this evening. So thank you for this chance to talk.
Thank you for being here with me.
as a literary agent, I specialize in memoirs. I see people from my hometown. Yeah. And I think there's no other medium. This is why I love them. In a first-person memoir, like, you're the closest to someone else's consciousness, right? Like, there's nothing, not video, not reading about someone. So I love that. It's weird to do it now in my own book, but.
Well, I think the other part of that, because we'll get into what's inside this book and your story, but you're so honest in this memoir, and you don't shy away from saying the things that you feel are unlikable about yourself. And it's so clear that you just have this just really honest understanding of who you are as a whole person, and not every memoir reads that way. So I think, part of my feeling, ending this book feeling like I know you, is just appreciating that really comprehensive sense of self that you bring to this story. So will you tell us a little bit about, firstly, the title, The Many Lives of Mama Love? Where does that come from?
So Mama Love was my jail nickname, and every woman in jail has a nickname, and you get it in two ways. Either your personal brand on the streets is so strong it travels with you, right? Or the other women give you a nickname. And so that became my nickname. A lot of the women I was in jail with were not that much older than my oldest son. So he was 17 at the time of my arrest. My youngest was almost 4. So, one of my closest friends in there was 19. So I was a mother in jail with nowhere to put that mother energy. So that was a nickname I was given. And, it wasn't originally the title of the book.
There was another title?
Yeah. So when it was, so books sell usually from a proposal. And so the title I had originally was The Neighbor from Hell and Other People I Have Been. So.
Sharper edges to that one.
Yeah. And there's a whole story about that title, but the CEO of Simon Schuster was like, no one wants to hang out with a neighbor from hell. And I was like, well, it's kind of the point of the book, but we had a lot of discussions and changed the title in the process, and it's the right title.
It's the right title because it's the right representation of you, right?
Yeah.
And so much of your story is about your self-identification and how you can release yourself of the shame of your mistakes. So to title a memoir with the worst thing that somebody might call you probably wouldn't indicate this incredible journey that you've been on, and the acceptance that you have grown toward in understanding yourself.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was, so when I was, we're going to just jump ahead, but when I was sentenced, the next day in the local newspaper, the Santa Cruz Sentinel, my picture was on the front page, above the fold, and it had the headline, Neighbor from Hell. So I was called that. And then when I was in jail, someone printed out all of these comments that people had written online from that article. And hundreds of them, and anonymously mailed it to me in jail. And there wasn't a lot to read in jail, so I just read these things over and over again, these horrible things, and just internalized it. And I carried it around for years, even to the beginning of this book. So at first I was like, well, this is kind of taking the power away, because I was, I lived for so long afraid people would, Google me. But yeah, I'm glad it's not the title now.
So you're going to read for us in just a moment, right? So, like a lot of memoirs, this one starts at most likely your rock bottom moment. And so would you set that up for us a little bit? And then if you want to borrow my copy, you can borrow my copy. Yeah, you have your own over here.
Yeah. So interesting story. So the book actually originally I started it in chapter 3. And the first line of the book was hide the drugs. So it started like right in that moment when the police are knocking on my door. And then I went backwards a little bit, thanks to some great editing. So it starts, I'll just read a few paragraphs from the first chapter from the beginning and the end. And the second chapter was a late edition chapter also of me committing my crimes the day before. And it's National Book Lovers Day, so this is a good sentence to start my book with today. Reading was my first addiction. When I tell people this today, they laugh and nod as if they understand, as if they too are part of a secret book addict society whose greatest crime is staying up late, a flashlight under the covers, compulsively reading page after page. The strange thing is, no one ever asks me what my second addiction is. I mean, someone who loved to read could never be a real addict, could they? The kind of addict who steals from their family, betrays the people they love, commits felonies, implodes their life because the finding and using and finding more consumes every ounce of who they used to be. No one ever loses their job because they read too much. There are no book club interventions. The prisons aren't full of people who stole to fund their Kindle habit. The truth is, I've only ever had one addiction, the white well of addictions, escape. From as far back as I can remember, there has always been a better place than wherever I am, a better me than whoever I was. Blah, 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 childhood trauma, and then...
But that's it. Very brief on the childhood trauma.
And then I'll read the last few paragraphs of the intro. So I'm going off to college. It's a very short chapter, it's 4 pages, and I'm already in college. I majored in creative writing because that meant I could keep reading, keep writing, and keep escaping. I thought I could outrun whatever afflicted my family, and I swore I would never be like any of them. I thought education meant equaled inoculation, and if I just kept being the good girl with the good grades who said the right thing and played the right parts, my life would not end in Anna Karenina tragedy. But you can't outrun yourself. And eventually books and writing didn't give me the escape I still craved. I turned to sex and food and money when I had it and more sex when I didn't. And then it was opiates, Vicodin for a long, semi-manageable time, and then heroin. I was addicted to all those things and none of those things. Escape was always my real addiction, the one true high. Books were just my gateway drug. Sex just got me pregnant. Food just made me puffy. Vicodin just helped me pretend I was happy. The heroin, though, that gave me everything I'd ever wanted. Peace, joy, escape. Until it didn't. And everything I knew and everyone I loved was gone.
Thank you. That was beautiful. You write this sentence just a few pages, I think, after that. No villain ever thinks of herself as a villain. Will you talk about what that means and how you kind of managed this fractured identity that you were living out at that point in your life?
So, the year before my arrest, I began smoking heroin, and eventually, as these things go, I stopped going to work. The money ran out. My kids I had 6 kids in private school. And I started stealing from my mom friends while they were dropping their kids off. And I told myself, I stole from my neighbors and I bought groceries, but I fed their son with groceries. I'm justifying in my head all these ways that I knew right from wrong, but I'm justifying in my head all these ways that I wasn't really hurting someone. I'm using their credit card at the gas station, but that'll just be the bank, just all those kinds of things. And I knew I wanted to stop and I just couldn't, which is the nature of addiction. But also I kept thinking, I'll fix it tomorrow. I'll get everything together tomorrow, but I just have to have some drugs today so I feel well enough to fix tomorrow. And so it was just this endless, crazy cycle. So when I was arrested, there was a part of me that was terrified and a part of me that was relieved.
Relieved because this meant something had to change?
It meant that this craziness, I had no idea of the craziness to come, but this craziness of really slow, inefficient self-destruction, right, was over. That constant, just that constant chasing every day, and the irony is, I grew up in a family where we didn't have a lot of language for emotions or how you're feeling or any, I didn't have the ability to ask for help. And what's funny, I mean, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny now, looking back. I remember thinking, like, one, I can't tell anyone I have a problem, because how on earth could I go to rehab for 30 days and be away from my children for 30 days? Like, that was unimaginable to me.
Right. And then what happens, of course, is so much more,
Yeah.
So much more severe than that. It reminds me of what you often hear people say. I'm thinking about the article that came out, The Neighbor from Hell. People tell themselves, well, that could never be me. That could never happen to me. Because there's this sense of safety that we all really crave, and thinking that we're protected from, sometimes ourselves, right? And listening to you talk about this addiction and the way that it grew, it feels like it could have happened to anybody who had to escape something, mentally.
Yeah.
How does it, how did you make sense of this division between yourself and others at that point? Because you had been part of this community, people thought of you a certain way, and then they didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It was just like I was pretending, I was role playing, I was, the addiction for me, for whatever I had, in whatever ways I was predisposed. What is the word?
Predisposed.
Yeah,
No,
that word.
Disposed.
Disposed to addiction. Back before the opiate crisis was a crisis, when my kids were little, like, pain medication, opiates were handed out as samples. Like you went to the doctor, like, my ear hurts, here, try this. It's sample, this little bubble packs, samples everywhere. And for whatever reason, I, the way that worked in my brain, I thought it made me, when I took an opiate, I'm smarter, funnier, brighter, a better mom. Playing army guys and doing laundry is not so boring, and I thought I needed, and it's tricky, and it takes one to do that, and then two, and then, on and on and on. But really it was just fear-based, like I would have to take 20 Vicodin to have a conversation where you're looking in my eye right now, and so it robbed my ability to really connect. It kept people at a distance, and I don't know what your question was, but.
No, I think, I think you've explained so beautifully just how this kind of is a domino effect for people. And then, you had this fear of being found out because you didn't want to be separated from your children. And then talk about what happens next, because then you were forced to be. And this became the fight for your life and for your kids' lives.
Right. Well, I was, that original first chapter of Hide the Drugs, the police knocked on the door, and my youngest son, who was almost 4, was the only one home at the time. And, I just remember walking down the stairs, and it was, sheriffs in the house, and they, I begged them to let me call someone to come pick up my son. And they called Child Protective Services. And I was in handcuffs, and he's crying. He's at that age, stranger danger. He's never spent a night away from me. And so there was this moment where I'm watching, I still get like a little, choked up about it, where I'm watching him, he's just driven away in a sedan, and he's wants me to comfort him, but my hands are handcuffed. And in that moment, life just kind of split for me. It was very like out of body. And as I was going, they were taking me to jail, and they were bringing me into the jail, the deputy kind of grabbed my arm, and I was like, "Where's my son? Where have you taken him?" Asking over and over again. And he grabbed my arm, and he said, "You'll never see your son again. You should not be anyone's mother." And like that moment was like my worst fears, right? Like my worst, I was like, I just kind of like hung my head, and I was like, oh my God, he's right. And so, 2 days, 2 days in jail, not to give away the whole book, and but 2 days in jail, I really believed, it's like really the darkest moment of my life. I really believed, one, that, I believe in second chances, third chances for other people, right? I love, I'm a writer. I've always been. I love a redemption arc, right? But I thought redemption was for good people, and I just believed in that moment I was bad, and that there was no going to be no redemption for me. And I thought it would be better for my children to have a mother who wasn't alive than who was in prison. And I thought, it was like a crazy amount of charges. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to see my boys till they're in their 40s. Like, I didn't know. So in that moment, I was like, I've just failed at life. Like, there is no, like, I've just failed. And it was like a calm decision. And then I failed at ending my life, not to give the book away, but I, didn't succeed there. But that was really the darkest moment. And it wasn't like the next day I was like, oh, everything's great. It was just like, I had no idea how I was going to get through the separation, the public humiliation, the rebuilding a life. It was a long journey.
There's so much about the women that you encountered along the way in G Block. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking about how people come into the prison system and either really succumb to what, from your book I now understand to be 1,000 landmines. It's so set up to work against you. And how you managed at that point, after reaching that really dark moment, to then try to sidestep them and walk your way through it. So will you talk about this? Because this is you becoming Mama Love, and it really felt like your maternal presence changed the culture of the community that you were part of in that setting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because people will make a community, I think, make a family wherever they are, right? Mm-hmm. So, I spent a year with these women in G Block, and then in next door in this place called Blaine Street, which is, and it was very obvious that I'd never been to jail before when I got it, and it was a little bit of a joke at first, because I'm trying to open locked doors and people are laughing at me, and
that would have been me. I think we could all relate.
I was like, what?
Some of those missteps.
But really, like, those women saved me. Like, they really saved me. Detoxing is not a great experience. Detoxing in jail is not a great experience. And people took care of each other. Like, 80% of the women in jail are mothers. It's about 54% or something of people in all of, prisons, state prisons, federal prisons, are parents to minor children. So, the statistics, I don't know the number off, but most women in jail, the reasons they go to jail are interpersonal. There's, a really high rate of domestic violence, sexual assault, childhood abuse. So you have a bunch of traumatized women together, and we took care of each other.
And were others fighting for the small chance that they could regain their families in the same way that you were? Because the thread throughout your time there is that you had been not promised, but you had been told that there was a very specific path that you had to take, right, and you had to make no errors along the way in order to regain custody of your child.
Right. So because my son was just before he turned 4, I had a year to meet all the requirements of Child Protective Services in order to not lose my parental rights forever. And I had a year in jail was my sentence. So and that happens. Sometimes women get sentenced to 18 months and they have a year. So the women I were with, a lot of them had children. A lot of them had already lost children. So everybody was going through the same thing or had been through the same thing when it came to fighting to be a mom again. And just like no one thinks of themselves as a villain, like no one's growing up saying, oh, I want to become an addict, or I want to go to jail someday, or I want to lose my children. Everybody had a story in there. And there were women who were young and who had multiple children and didn't understand ovulation. Like there was a lot of trauma in there, and the system, the way the jail is run, it's in the main jail, it's mostly men who are controlling your access to the outside world, communication, when you eat, what you wear. So, I mean, if you look at the red flags for, like, what are the red flags in a relationship for domestic violence, it's the structure of jail. So you already have traumatized women in this system.
I mean, that's something that came up for me a lot, was just this idea that how does anybody get out of this? Especially because, you were talking about how this is a family, but then at the same time, this is a lot of trauma bumping into trauma. And so not everybody is for you. And some of the efforts to sabotage your dream and your vision for yourself, I mean, I was just...
Yeah.
I
It wasn't all kumbaya.
No, not all kumbaya, and mistakes made on your part and others.
Right.
But something kind of amazing happens. There is a book in jail. So will
Yeah.
you talk about?
Actually, I saw the book. So the one book I had in jail, you can't see it, it's around the corner here, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle. So that book was there, and I, and for a lot of months you're waiting to get sentenced. You don't know what's going to happen. I don't know, am I going to go to prison? Am I going to try to become a firefighter in California? Like, am I going to see my kids again? And so that was the book, and I just read it over and over again. And, jail's a really great place to learn to meditate. Like, there's easier ways, so don't, like, get an app, don't do that. But that book really helped me. It was the only, because I would lie awake at night and just replay every bad decision I'd made in my life, right? Like, every time I could have gone left, but I went right, and just like all my regrets and so that book was the first book that taught me how to quiet my mind. And it was a really simple thing. It was like, I don't know what page it's on, but I read it, and it was like, just think about what your next thought is going to be. And when you do that, your mind just stops. Like, try it tonight. Like, it works. So you get this little brief, like half a second, like, peace. And then I just kept building on that. And it helped me, like, be present, which is really hard to do when you're, like, going to court appearance. I started sending love and light to the people who weren't that happy with me in the court system. But yeah, it saved me for sure.
It feels like you spread that too. You spread your understanding and your takeaways from that book with others too. And really maybe that was the most maternal gift, you could offer at that point.
Yeah.
Is this idea that that we can find control in our own minds. Even when there are real bars around us.
Yeah.
So you spend about a year in the system, and an interesting thing happens to you in the second part of that experience, which is that you become this ghostwriter. Will you talk about that?
Yeah. So I've always been a writer since I was young. That's what I did. I never needed to do drugs or anything when I'm writing. But then I stopped writing, for a good 10 years when I had my children, and then, my addiction took off. And so I started writing again in jail. At first I was writing, I started writing this little like YA novel and mailing it to one of my teenage sons who was 13. And then I wrote like a narrative poem about the women there. And then I started ghostwriting, which is I would talk to the women and listen to their stories, and I'd write a letter to the judges as them, which is probably not legal to do at all, but I did that.
Chat GPT may change the face of all this.
Yeah.
So.
But I would write letters to the judge as that, I'd listen to her story, and then write a letter as that woman to ask to be put in like long-term residential treatment instead of prison, or to get a pass to, like I said, 80% were mothers, to go to a high school graduation or a funeral or a special event. And I was really good. Or I broke up with people. I broke up with a lot of people. I seduced a few on behalf of, like I was doing all the genres, right? But it felt really good. Like, it was helpful. I got a lot of bear claws because you can't do anything for free, right? Because it's suspicious, right? So, yeah. So like ramen and bear claws were my writing fee, and it was great. But then I tried to write for myself a letter. My oldest son was graduating high school. So it was my first son about to graduate high school. I'm in jail, which is like not the big mom dream, right? Like there's mom guilt and then there's that. And so I wrote a letter as me to get a 2-hour pass to go to his, and I was in the minimum security at this point, and to get a pass to go to his graduation, and it got denied. So I was like, okay, I'm better at writing for other people, right? As other people. But the judge told me later, he said, I denied you so that you would never miss another one of your children's graduations, which I haven't.
That's tough love. I think there's also something really interesting about empathy in that, because as I was reading this section of the book, I was thinking, like, just what incredible empathy it takes to be a writer. And then to be a ghostwriter is another level, because you are really, really putting yourself in the mind, in the heart of another human. And to pull it off, you have to achieve a type of empathy that is rare. And it's interesting to me that you could do that so easily for others. And this makes a lot of sense, right? But it was hard to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were still carrying around so much shame at that point. Was it easier to extend that kind of kindness, that kind of empathy towards others and the mistakes that you knew of, that they had made?
Oh, 100% easier, And I was, I think I had training in my life of like being other people other than myself, right? Just to, Tasha went to high school with me, and so I could I could be whoever I thought her parents wanted me to be, so that I could go to your house and have dinner with you, right? So I was really good, I think, at understanding other people's motivations and not my own. And empathy is a superpower, for ghostwriting and for social justice, for anything, for everything, empathy and compassion. But it was far easier for me to understand the mistakes other people made than my own.
This chapter really foreshadows what is to happen for you later on. So this is hard with memoir, because you feel like you're entitled to a few spoilers, because we're all here knowing that good things happen to you after. But I don't want to tell every story or have you tell every story from this book. But the act of ghostwriting, the skill that requires, that serves you enormously well later on. So can you talk about that transition to the real world and how you brought some of this experience and all that learning that you had to do, all that hard learning into the the path that you had to build for yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, getting, when I was in jail, I would see women would get out that had been in there for a few months, and then they would come back. They'd get rearrested and be back in 2 weeks. And I would be like, oh, like this is where I didn't have empathy. I was like, if I get out of here, I'm never coming back. Like, that's so stupid. Like, how could you do that? And then when I got out, I realized, I had no idea the obstacles and the barriers and the ways in which you still have to pay, and how much safer you feel in jail. Like, there were times when I was like, I'm safer in jail, where I missed it, honestly. But I was, trying to rebuild my life, get my son back. And I was in line at the welfare office in Santa Cruz County to try and get benefits to support us, because I was struggling to find work. 87% of employers in this country do a background check, right? So it's really hard. And I think it's like 1 in 3 people in the U.S. have some kind of criminal record, arrest record, conviction, incarceration. So it's hard to get a job, and if you have been incarcerated and you get a job, you make 60% or 40%, something less pay, right? So it was really impossible. So I was in line to get benefits, and if you have a felony drug conviction, you can't. Sometimes you're banned for life to get any kind of subsidized welfare benefits. So I was in line, and I applied for a job at a literary agency. It was like a part-time, 5 hours a week job. And I was like, wow, I'd love to work with books. And he said he worked with Desmond Tutu, so like I half thought I was gonna get murdered, at this job interview.
Too good to be true.
Because it's a Craigslist ad, right?
Yeah.
But I got the call to come interview, and it was this decision moment where I'm like, do I stay here and try and get some food for today, or do I go to this job interview and just try? And so I did, and I started right away collaboratively writing for books, the first for a doctor, and just using those skills at being other people. I'd never thought about a career as a ghostwriter or a collaborative writer, as we call it. But pretty quickly, like within, and this is a couple years, wasn't like right out of jail, couple years out. But I'm working, in the first year working this agency, I am collaborating on a book for Archbishop Desmond Tutu about forgiveness.
Like, what a place to start, right? Like, of all the things, of all the projects, that feels so destined.
Yeah.
You know, it could have been any project, and yet it's a
Right.
project on forgiveness.
Right.
And how were you conceiving of forgiveness at that point?
It's great for other people. You know, like I had that that kind of attitude, you know, like obviously, you know, this is one of my idols is that, you know, my seventh grade teacher from Massachusetts came to a book event at Harvard a couple nights ago. And I remember doing a report on apartheid for him. And I was like, he's in the book, Mr. Miller. But so it was surreal. And it felt so good to do something good, you know, like I was trying to prove I was valuable again. And I was like, you know, I was like good adjacent, right? You know?
I think we need to coin that. I think we are all good adjacent.
Yeah, I was like, I worked really hard to be good adjacent, like here. But I was, you know, the chapter on self-forgiveness, I write about it in the book, but that was like really hard. And I actually went back to the women in jail and was doing those exercises, and it was hard for everybody, right? So I just started ghostwriting book after book, like 12 books in 7 years, I think, and hiding in the acknowledgments and trying to prove to myself, you know, and these weren't judgy people, you know, it was like Archbishop Tutu and, you know, our agency worked with Brian Stevenson and the Dalai Lama and, you know, Stanford professors. Like nobody was judging me as hard as I was judging myself or as unforgiving. But I was keeping my secret the whole time, desperately afraid that people would find out about my past. They didn't know. When I was working with Archbishop Tutu, I'd never told him I was incarcerated. I didn't tell anybody. I was just living in fear, which is a really isolating way to live for, you know, 10 years.
But this cast of people in your life, they're not just important people. They are the thought leaders in forgiveness and social justice. And I cannot imagine a more influential group of humans to be collaborating with than those minds. So how did that inform your kind of sense of identity at that point? Were you feeling like there was more acceptance for your own mistakes, or did it take longer? Is that still a process? Is that always ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't work with these people and be like in their minds and reading and editing their books and helping them bring their books to the world without absorbing all of that. So it taught me a lot, but it still didn't, I was still desperately afraid they'd find out my secret. Like it didn't fix that for me.
So I always think about memoir as a way of just choosing to rid yourself of the shame. Like if you write it and you say it and it's out there for everybody, then it can't be inside you anymore. So was it the writing of this book? Was it people finding out and not reacting in the ways that you feared that helped alleviate some of that? Yeah,
I mean, I think the thing that, you know, and it's a process. It's not, you know, shame is so sticky. Like it'll still pop up, right? I have a high school friend who just read my book and knows all, you know, like it's still that, you have that moment, sorry to just single you out, but there is that moment like, you know, what are people going to think or how are they going to judge me? But what really helped me was community, right? And because, you know, when I got Caden back, like he's in second grade, imagine this, right? And so you meet the moms in second grade and like, oh, our kids are playing together. Like, you know, can I send him to your house for a play date? Like, I can't be like, okay, but, you know, I have 32 felonies because probably you wouldn't want to send your child over if you knew that. So it was like, I kept everyone at a distance. I did meet like, you know, I had this tribe of quirky, wacky people who did improv comedy who were the first people I told, and I kind of did it in like a jokey way, in a stand-up comedy routine where I was like, this one time when I was in prison, you know, and they didn't, And afterwards, it was this moment where someone came up to me and was like, "Is that true?" And I was like, "Oh, what do I say?" And I was like, "Yes." And they were like, "Cool, let's go to lunch." Like, it was so non-eventful.
That was the right group to.
Yeah, no, and they,
Try
but
that
it was like these little things like that, you know? And like in the recovery community, like people don't freak out at that stuff. You know, everybody has a story there, but out in the real world, it was different. So it was just like little bits of community. And then, you know, I got up on a local TEDx stage and gave a talk and just said, here's the worst thing. Here's the thing I'm afraid people are going to find out, and sort of snitched on myself, right? And I had such a feeling of lightness after that. It was like, here's my story. I'm not going to run and hide. And so that was really the step. And then, you know, when I did the book, I was like, okay, I'm only going to do if I'm going to be really, really honest, you know? And I was really, really honest, you know?
And thank goodness, because why? Why even bother telling a story
Yeah.
of this magnitude if you're not
Right.
going to be honest in that way?
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of time because I know others have questions and I have 85,000 more because we haven't even gotten to Oprah. But after years of this collaborative writing, what does it mean for you to have this in the world with your name and your name alone, and it's yours?
Yeah. It's amazing. It's really weird and surreal a little bit. But, you know, despite all the addiction in jail and all of that stuff, like, you know, writing my own books, that's what I wanted to do since I was a kid, right? So it's like part of it is like, you know, I thought I'd do it at like 25, but part of it is like a dream come true. And then part of it is like, it just feels good that I'm telling this. I mean, it's a crazy story, but it feels good to just kind of own it, you know, just like because again, no one was judging me as much as I was judging myself. No one was as unforgiving. People are pretty awesome. And
Except for whoever sent you that newspaper clipping.
yeah, well, no, there's not some
special
there's
place
been
for
some not so
episode,
awesome
yeah.
comments lately too with all of this, and I just don't it's just none of my business what people I care what people think about the book, like read the book, but in terms of my life choices and all of that, I don't take all that on anymore. My one of my children, like, because there's been a New York Times article and a lot of press around the book in the last couple weeks, and someone wrote, like, "That's my mom" on there, like, proudly. And then a random stranger wrote, "Oh, I feel sorry for you, horrid woman," online. And I was just like, that would have sent me
Spiraling.
Yeah, but I'm too old to have a 10-year shame spiral again, so I'm just not going to do it. And really, if you don't believe the things that people say about you, you can do anything, And I think if I had believed all of those things, I've helped bring a lot of great books into the world that, by being good adjacent, that have done a lot of good. And I think this is helping people. Whatever you've done, whatever the worst thing you've done, it's not as bad as what you're going to read here. So you can feel better about yourself. Like, that helps people, right? It's a cautionary tale. But I think it's really helping. I want people to not have the same biases about who's in jail and what they're capable of after, because really, it was really hard for me. Then we'll stop for questions, because it felt like everything I did up into 41 years before I was arrested, all of that was erased. All the good I'd done, I was a good mom, but I was also became addicted, So I would hope that we have a little more forgiveness and less judgment for people and give them more opportunities,
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. We still have a lot of space to grow in the area of forgiveness. But I think the closer we get to other people's stories, the closer we get to understanding what that means, too.
Right. And I also think formerly incarcerated women make the best employees, right? So just if you're thinking
that
of
about
hiring,
teachers, so it might be it might be both.
yeah. I mean, you want someone who knows crime doesn't pay, right? And has something to, really wants to prove their value and worth and work really hard, because that's everything.
Anybody who can navigate these landmines and find another way to live and reach that other side, that it's remarkable, right? And that in theory should be the point of the whole
Right.
system,
Right.
is allowing people that chance.
And allowing people to actually pay for their crimes, because you think that you're paying, like I'm going to go do my time and do my probation, but then we have all these ways in which we want people to pay forever and generations to pay, so we just let people pay for them.
I want to make sure we leave time for your questions. Does anybody have a question? I am happy to fill in with the rest of my questions as well. Oh, great. I didn't even see the mic.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you found that there is a difference between the situation for men and women, first with the severity of sentences and the opportunities for alternatives to sentencing, and also what it's like, the prison life is like for men as opposed to women, and also afterwards the opportunities that are available for each.
Thank you. So, I mean, I don't know what it's like for men, but prisons and jails were designed for men, right? The majority of women are in jail, which is actually a much harder place to be long-term than prison, because it's not meant for long-term stays. There's no programming. There's no, the visits are limited. So I think prison is hard for everyone, but women statistically respond to programming really well, and there's a lot less programming for women in jail. You know, women's incarceration has increased 750% in the last 3 decades. You know, so I've co-founded a nonprofit called the Gemma Project, which is a gender responsive and trauma responsive care for women while they're incarcerated, and reentry services. There's a lot of program reentry for men. And there are more men than women in prison. But, you know, women, because they are, 80% of them are mothers, and they're often the sole caregivers, they need a lot of support. Everybody needs a lot of support. So, you know, I think prison is hard for anyone. Incarceration is hard for anyone. People are punished universally when they get out. Men and women both are made to pay for a lifetime, you know, whether it's in housing or job opportunities or judgment and gossip and bias and all of the things that we have. So, you know, it's not great for anyone.
Do women get lighter sentences?
I don't know the statistics on that, but I will tell you, my husband was my co-defendant. We had the same exact charges, the same exact sentence. He did not, you know, I'm like, despite the 32 felonies, like I'm a rule follower, you know, like I like to follow all the directions. Like I didn't get in trouble. I didn't get in trouble in jail. Like I did everything that I was supposed to do. I did probation, everything I was supposed to do. He had a lot of struggles and relapses, and he was let off probation 5 years earlier than me. He was actually he was let out of having to pay back the restitution, and he's had his record expunged. So I only have an experience of one, but in some ways, and this is just my opinion, not, you know, there's better experts, but in some ways we judge women harder for their mistakes, because maybe we expect men to get in trouble, and I think women are judged more harshly. I think they're punished in different ways, and yeah.
Did you get expunged?
No, I still.
Can you?
I don't, you know, when I did my book launch event in Santa Cruz, California, my hometown, last Tuesday on publication day, my defense attorneys showed up at the event. There's over 200 people there. There were a couple judges I had. There was one of the Officer Lonnie in the book was there. And I said my defense attorney, old ones, you know, I had public defenders. I didn't have a private attorney. They asked me to sign their book, and I was like, do you think I could get my record expunged now? And she was like, yeah, call me. And I was like, I called you 3 years ago. So I think maybe I could try. You know, it's not as critical for me, but I would like to, you know, but again, very different treatment. I think we expect men to get in trouble, and women were like, that's really bad, but we're both parents, right? So.
Other questions?
I was so struck by what you said about escapism and reading, because I think probably all of us here love books, and for one of those very reasons. Do you still struggle with feeling that need to escape? Do you think of it as a negative thing, or how have you reframed it in your life, and are you still a big reader?
So I have a suitcase full of books I'm bringing home with me. So yes, I'm still addicted to books and reading. But I'm not, when I was little and read, it was because there was violence and chaos and trauma, and I hid into my imagination and books in my room. So I read desperately, right? There's nothing wrong with escaping into book. Books are amazing. But I don't, I try not to do anything that's causing me to avoid my feelings, right? So, and writing for me from a young age was how I processed my own emotional life, right? Because again, I didn't have a family where they even said how was your day? It was just not a thing. So it's how I made meaning of the world. It's how I understood other people, through writing and books. So yeah, I'm never going to go to rehab for books. Not going to happen.
Great question. Any others? Spotlight is finally yours. Yeah. It's so well deserved.
So I'm the friend from high school. So obviously I haven't read as many books as you have, but reading a book that's authored by someone that I knew many years ago was sort of surreal for me on so many levels. But I think this was the greatest book I've ever written about redemption, truly. For me, I mean, I could probably speak, we could chat for hours, but at what point do you, or have you, in that journey, because I know you sort of talked about, I had to sort of get through this, or I had to forgive myself, or I had to just sort of, did you say, okay, this is who I am? And there were these points when you were interviewing with Doug, and then when you met Sam, and with your kids. But at what point in time did you say, "This is me. This is me. This is who I am. I'm not." Do you remember that? Is it in your mind
right now? No. It happened incrementally, but definitely when I decided to do I couldn't have done the book, written the book proposal, put it out there in the world and all of that if I wasn't ready to own my story. So I think, that feeling I had when I got up on that TEDx stage and said, here's the thing, I've been so afraid people are gonna find out about me. I was once an inmate from hell, and here's all the other people I've been, and this is a season of my life. The feeling I had after that, after being in shame for so long, was certainly better than any drug. And I wanted more of that. And I was like, okay, this can actually help other people. And so yeah, I think, deciding to do the book, really deciding to do it. And I had to go away to write it, away from everyone, because it wasn't pretty. But that was the moment. I was like, okay, I'm gonna own this story, and this is, it came into practice again. When the New York Times did the profile piece a couple weeks ago, I got a message from someone who I went to college with, and he said, "Congratulations!" And I haven't heard, I didn't hear from him for a long time. Congratulations on the New York Times piece. I suggest you don't read the comments. And it was this thing where I was like, okay, well, you kind of want me to, but it was that moment where I was like, I'm actually not going to, I'm actually don't need to. And some were good and some were not good, and that's how it is in the world online. But I think that was the moment where I was like, oh, I actually mean what I'm saying, right? It was that moment of this is okay. It's okay if people don't like me, or it's okay if people are, judging the story harshly or whatever. Like, it's just okay. It's just not my business, right? So I think it was really, I mean, the book, and then the response has been great, and that's super healing. And like having, the judges who, sentenced me or took my son away be there in support. That was been super. It's all been super healing and wonderful.
Good. So proud of you.
Thank you.
All right, last question. Have you thought about who's going to play you in the movie?
It's being made into a TV series, not a movie, but I don't know. Someone, young and cute, obviously. No. No, I don't know who will.
Are you taking suggestions?
Yeah.
Because that's always a really fun game to play.
Or not. Yeah.
We might have time for one more question.
Hi. I haven't read the book, so you may have covered this, but what do you think would have been the suitable response by society or the authorities to what you had done, different from jail, being sentenced to jail?
I mean, there's no part of me that thinks I didn't do anything wrong and I didn't break laws and I shouldn't have paid for my crimes. So it's not so much about, if we have a system where incarceration is a thing, then I should go to jail and I should have to meet the requirements of the legal system. So I wouldn't change that, but I would change all of the ways post that I had to keep paying, and that so many have to keep paying. That's where the work is, there's decarceration, that's a whole other thing. So like have people pay for their crimes, but then let them, and all the barriers that we set up so that people never become more than the worst thing they've done or the sum of their crimes, that's where the work needs to be done.
Thank you.
Beautifully said. Yeah. If you haven't read the book yet, please, one more.
Okay. Yes. So I read the book twice. Actually, I listened to it because my eyes are jacked up. But I really appreciated so much about what you wrote, especially being from Santa Cruz, and spending time in jail, and I know Blaine Street, and I know the camp, I know the long-term treatment place, it used to be called Sunflower House, and now it's something else, all that stuff. But really, what struck me, I really want to think about was the chapters about the forgiveness piece was huge. And just your way of speaking in the book. And that's why I got the audio book, because I just loved you talking to me. It's great. Having you in my ear was great. But really my question is not so much about this book, it's about the next book. Because I know there's stuff you left out. And whenever I read a book or hear somebody's story, I go, so what am I not hearing? There was plenty in this. There's a ton of, it's huge. But, and I know there's more. Mm-hmm. I know there's more. You kind of give some hints in the credits at the end. Credits of DNA and alcohol stuff. So I'm curious about that.
So I have a meeting with Simon Schuster in the fall to figure that out. And part of me, I'm thinking about doing a novel because it's one of the things also I wanted to do since I was young. But what Jerry's talking about in the acknowledgement, the crazy thing that happened, that it was like too much for the book. So I was like, this is already unbelievable. And that's what I love about true stories. Because if you put it in fiction, you'd be like, it's not realistic. But like 7 years ago, I got an entirely new family, like a new, through a DNA test. I have a father and siblings. After losing all of my siblings to addiction, I got this sort of mirror, brand new family. But it was one of those things I was like, this is too much. Even for me. But yeah, so maybe something around that. Maybe, I don't know if it'll probably end up in a novel, but based on that.
I think we're all voting for another memoir. Remarkable. Many lives.
Many lives.
Mama Love. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lara.
Thank you. Yeah.
If you haven't read it, you're going to devour every page. And it's likely that you've already devoured other words that Lara has written as well. So
awesome. Thank you.